And it says a lot about how many women were working in the marketing and ad agencies in Detroit in the 50s
Right.
that got greenlit at all.
Welcome back to Car-Pinionated, our weekly show on cars, the car industry, and driving in general, and some opinions too. I think tonight we will have opinions. I'm Doug Stewart, digital executive producer for Fox 61 in Hartford. And with me are Jeff Buchholz from WBBM in Chicago and Glenn Packman from beautiful Fairfield County, noted comedian and car enthusiast. So this week, I'm going to toss it to Glenn because Glenn came up with this great idea. And so, Glenn, you explain what we're going to do.
Sure. This is pretty basic, actually, and it's something that I think a lot of people, even if you're not big car nuts, you'll be able to relate to. And that is really well and really badly named cars. Now, this is a kind of a superficial topic, I will admit, but it's also really important because a car is marketed and sold and has an image. And picking the right name is kind of key for the image of a car. So as much as it's sort of a simple thing, it's also pretty complex and also very important. And it's something that, you know, everybody can get in contact with because we all see cars on a daily basis, and some of us know their names. Some of us at 100 paces know their names, and we're called car geeks, okay? But we are.
There are dozens of us, dozens.
But the whole point of it is that, you know, naming a car, I think, is an important thing, and the wrong name can really send a car on a bad trajectory, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay. Glenn, would you like to go first?
I would love to go first. Are we going to start with good or bad? Let's do good news. Let's do the good news before the bad news.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I am going to start with a rather general good place, and I'm going to say that muscle cars in general have really favored well from the good naming crew. The good name department works really, really hard on muscle cars for some reason, because we have a lot of really well-named muscle cars. I will throw out just a couple classics right off the bat. The Ford Mustang is a terrific car. A Mustang is something hardy and, you know, there's an old West feel about it, something very American and sturdy and fast and a little crazy. You know, what a great name for a car like the Mustang. You know, it's something sporty and fun, and you want to ride a Mustang, right? It gives you all of that, you know. And what I'm talking about having a great name is it gives you that feeling that will make you want to maybe go to a car dealership and buy one of these things, and that's the important part. So I always felt the Chevy Camaro had a cool name. I don't even know what it means, but it's cool.
Doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything, right? Yeah, it's just then all the better because a Camaro is a Camaro, you know. And again, once we saw the Camaro and you know, in its first iterations and how beautiful it was, it conjured up all those images. So I'm just going to say, even before, well, before 1984, forgive me, but the Challenger was a great name and then not a great name. And P.S. That's something to be said about names, is you have to be careful with what you're naming. Something can come along and, you know, not cars, but all I can think of is there was a diet candy in the 60s called AIDS, AIDS, and they were murdered by the AIDS epidemic. They couldn't have predicted that. So so that's my first offering, is just muscle cars in general. Next.
Okay. Jeff?
I'm going to go to I'm going to start with at the beginning of what I think is one of the classic eras of American car styling, and that would be the early to mid 50s stretching through to the 60s. When the first hardtop cars came out in response to some GM executive's wife who always bought convertibles but never put the top down because she didn't want her hair messed up. That may be apocryphal, I don't know. But when the hard tops first started coming out, the folks at General Motors did such a good job naming the hardtop variants of their cars. The Chevy hardtop was the Bel Air, which connotes, you know, a richness, the richness and lushness of Southern California. The Buick was a name we'll get back to shortly, the Riviera styling. Again, glamorous, international, glamorous. The Oldsmobile styling was Fiesta. It's, you know, it's a party, it's a celebration. It's, again, you're bringing the outdoors in through, you know, the lack of a B pillar on your car. Pontiac had Catalina styling. Again, like the Bel Air, a nod to sort of glamorous world of California that people were just kind of starting to see on their television sets that were just coming in. Over time, those names became applied to actual models in the lineup, and I think the best use of it probably was the Buick Riviera, which in 1963 was a triumph of design, maybe the best thing Bill Mitchell ever did when he was the czar of design at General Motors. And a car incredibly a different size really for a high-end car, I think, at the time, and a different form factor. There were personal coupes before. The Thunderbird was a really good one. But this was very sleek. It was very different. It was inspired by a lot of the cars that Bill Mitchell saw when he was in London. And it caused a sensation, and rightly so. And there is, and that name was perfectly chosen for that particular car.
Excellent. I also had pony cars in general, you know, almost any one of them, the Barracuda, the Challenger, the, you know, just the Cougar, just all of them seem like dead on solid perfect. I'm gonna foray into the first bad name, the Subaru B9 Tribeca. Where are you going, guys? What are you thinking? What are you not thinking? How did this get beyond the committee? I don't understand. My understanding is that the B9 had something to do with they were going to rename all their cars into an alphanumeric. Am I right on that? I feel
that would make sense. I hadn't heard that, but that makes sense. They would start it with their flagship SUV, which the Tribeca would have been.
Right. And then you get the Tribeca in there, which I don't understand, you know, whatever. Okay. We'll name it for a district of New York. Sure. Okay. Fine. Whatever, you know.
Right.
We want Robert De Niro to buy one, so we're going to name it Tribeca.
Right, there you go. That goes under, like, if I can jump in for a sec, for me, it goes under like a category of disconnect names. Like, I used to own a Chevy Sonic, a terrific little car, really very underrated little car, but the name doesn't mean anything. You know, it's that Tribeca is like it's a wealthy part of Manhattan, and it's a bigger sized SUV. I just, you know, that disconnect there. So
and to go to Sonic, I either think of a hamburger stand, or a hedgehog.
The hedgehog, right. Maybe that's what they were trying to inspire. I don't know.
Right.
It's such a shame because it was such a good little product and it never really took off. I always felt that it was ineptly named. You know, it was like with the Sonic. You know.
So those would be those. That's a good and bad. I will let other people move on.
Glenn.
I'm going to venture into the outdoorsy realm and say that I thought that the Explorer was a great name for Ford's sort of, you know, that's when they were getting it, that when they were fleshing out what an SUV was. The Explorer is a great name. It inspires a lot. I think they muffed it up by using the X thing excessively. Everybody excessively, because then we had the Excursion and we had the Expedition, and that all seemed derivative off of a really good first name. And it was like, you know, I'm gonna name my kids Patty, and Patty's a great name. So now we have Patty Lynn and Patty Marie and Patty
Yeah.
Rose. You know, that's what I got from that. But I always thought that whenever I saw an Explorer, I was like, yep, that's the car you go exploring in. And similarly, the Forester by Subaru had the same sort of feel, you know. It gives you that idea of where the car is supposed to be, where you're headed, a feeling that you get when you drive the car. So
Where it will likely
Doug
never
Owens won.
go.
What's that?
Where it will likely never go, but you can
No,
think,
no,
oh well,
yeah, that's a
you
whole
know,
different.
I could,
Yeah,
I could
Yeah.
if I didn't, you know, if I didn't have all this other crap to do,
right.
you know, if I didn't have this huge list of things to do that my spouse
Right.
has given me, I could go do that. Right, exactly.
Right,
And
right.
honestly,
Oh,
and let me, I'm sorry, let me,
no,
while
no, go
I'm
ahead.
thinking
Go.
about it, we've talked about the Mustang and the Explorer. With a couple of exceptions, Ford is really good at this. They're really
I
good
think
at
Glenn
the
will have one
name.
of those exceptions coming up.
Well,
Yes.
so I mean, but they are generally
Tune
in the
in.
modern era, they're super good at this.
Yeah.
Even back to the
Usually.
Mustang, you're right. Spirited, energetic, the Maverick in the 70s, and now sort of against the grain, a different kind of whatever.
Mhm.
And the Explorer is a terrific example. Here's one that's not very good. The Ford 500.
Like you're waiting for
Right.
something else to be there.
Right. So
Right.
this was Ford's attempt to rework a Volvo platform into a line of full-size cars, ostensibly to replace the Taurus Sable, the excessively blobby Taurus Sable, which had pretty much become rental car fodder by this point in the early 2000s. So they rolled this car out, and it wasn't really a bad car by any particular measure. It had a pretty modern design language. It was an excellent platform. That Volvo platform was terrific. But someone at Ford decided that all of their cars, except for the Mustang, would have names that began with F, and all of their SUVs would have names that began with E. And so, as a nod back to the old Galaxy 500 of the 60s, one of the great Fords of the last few decades, they decided that this new Ford would be the Ford 500. That didn't last long, and I know why. Right around the time that the 500 was released and its companion, which I think was called the Mercury Montego, they brought that name back. Ford hired a guy, a CEO by the name of Alan Mulally, who'd just gotten burned in a management shakeup at Boeing. So he comes in and is in a product planning meeting with some of the folks at Ford, and they're showing him the new lineup. And he says, wow, these are all great. Where's the new Taurus? And they looked at him and said, well, we changed the name to 500. He was like, what? Taurus is literally the only Ford I know. How can you change that name? That's the car everybody knows.
Right.
So and I think it was less than 2 years later, the
Yeah, it wasn't very
500
long.
got refreshed and reintroduced as the Taurus, which is the name it should have had all along.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
I'm going to dovetail off of that and say that Ford's other catastrophically bad name for an otherwise good car was the Ford Probe. Because, ew. Okay, and I'll leave it at that.
Ford used the name Probe for a series of super aerodynamic styling exercises dating back to the late 70s when they owned Ghia. And they needed a name for this car because that car was probably a year and a half away from being introduced as the Mustang 3.
Yeah.
And the Mustang Owners Association got wind of that, and the UAW got wind of that and said, absolutely flippin' not. And so they had to come up with a name for it, and that was what they had laying around.
Right.
It's not a great name. You're right. The car was good. It was a good car. It was a Mazda platform, but it was very good.
Yeah,
but yeah, the name was unfortunate. That was a
it really was. It really was. It was a case of another good car with just a bad name. I'm sorry. It just every time I saw one, it's like, wow, what a beautiful car, and it's called a Probe. it just made me cringe, you know, and it still does to this day, obviously. So, yeah, no, sorry, it's a thumbs down on that one. But you know, you're right. Ford has pretty good. I think if we started tabulating like a percentage of good versus bad, Ford would be in the upper echelons there.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I'm going to give a blanket statement here. I think most alphanumerics are awful. I think there are certain ones, the BMWs and the Mercedes to a large degree, maybe because it's so clearly ingrained that this, you know, it's a 3 series, it's a 5 series, you know, whatever. I think they're fine, but like sometimes the MKS or the XT4, or the, you know, like I don't get it. It means nothing to me. It's just random numbers that and letters that sound good together. So I'm going to blanket that.
No.
Here's one that goes way back as a bad name. That probably wasn't really thought of as a bad name at first, but the Studebaker Dictator.
On my list.
You know,
Yup. Yup.
the Studebaker had a president. You know, maybe they had an ambassador. They had a lot of like leadershipy sort of
Champion,
titling.
sorry, Studebaker champion, Studebaker
Right,
president.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Hawk. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the Dictator probably fell out of fashion sometime around 1933.
Uh,
Um,
if I may, the last production year of The Dictator was 1937. And I would say 1938 was a pretty tumultuous year where dictators were concerned.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, a coincidence? I don't think so. But
No.
anyways, continue.
Yeah. But yeah, okay, so that's and so whose turn would we go
Glenn.
to?
Me,
Glenn.
okay, I'm gonna do one that I've always loved. And from a division that didn't come up with a lot of great names. Pontiac, for example, Pontiac did the Aztec with a K on the end, kind of an ugly spelling for an ugly car that didn't really make a lot of sense. You know, we can savage the Aztec until the end of time, but the name didn't help, you know, especially that it's spelled wrong. But I always loved the name Pontiac Tempest because there's a Shakespearean thing involved there for us Shakespeare nerds, but also just, you know, the whole idea of the raging storm, and there you are controlling the whole thing, you know, gives you almost, if you're behind the wheel of a tempest, that means you're sort of controlling something in a very godlike manner. And I always liked the name, and I was always kind of hoping that someday somebody would bring it back for some really cool product. But that's one of my sort of bad and good ones. So.
Well, I mean, I am a Pontiac stan forever and ever, and any podcast that savages the Aztec will be a 2-to-1 vote because I will defend it like crazy.
Really? Oh,
yes,
okay.
but that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
My next name is a good one, and it comes from another country. And it is on one of the world's great cars, by the way. It's the Citroen DS. Now, you're like, okay, that doesn't seem like much of a name at all. Let's think about the car itself. Incredibly advanced for the time when it came out in the 50s. Self-leveling suspension, headlights that would aim with the steering. You could incredibly soft ride, incredibly comfortable, very aerodynamic. The DS came as DS 19 and DS 21, kind of depending on the size of the engine. DS was formed as 2 letters. DS in the French language means goddess. So it's got meaning on a couple of different levels.
Yeah.
It is a model name, and also in its native language speaks to what sort of the representation of what the car is. After a few years, there was a lower priced version of the DS called the ID, capital D, and then the designation for the engine size. And ID is spoken in French means idea. So you have the French being entirely too clever for their own good, or anyone else's, really.
That's exactly the word I was going to say.
Yes,
clever. Yeah.
But a very cheeky name for one of the great cars of the world.
Very much so. Very much so.
Cool. That is cheeky. You're right. I like it.
I'm gonna go with, we're gonna go across the English Channel right now. The Austin Princess. Like,
Wow.
uh, is that the is princesses are lovely human beings, I'm sure. The idea is good, great, nothing against the idea. But is this what you want to name a small economy car? Because
Especially that
that's
one.
right. And it's like your pretensions are like way out of the league of that car. Right? If it was the top of the line with the, you know, 6 straight 6, and it was, you know, some Jaguar competitor, sure, I'd go with it. But like the other end of the market, no.
No. Mm-mm. If I can dovetail off of that and say that, you know, there have been cars that have been deliberately marketed towards the female buying market. They do this, you know, and I think coming up with a name that tries to hook in that end of the market is probably doubly difficult. I always admired that Ford named the Capri because, well, Capri pants are, you know, that's a
Sure.
fashion thing, but the Isle of Capri in Italy is something. It's, you know, it's a fun vacation, and it's, you know, it's similar to a Fiesta, but it's a lot more upscale and a little bit more exotic and everything. And I always felt like the Capri was a great name for a car that they were definitely trying to pitch to women in the United States. And to some extent, you know, success, I think they did. It was also a terrific car, you know. But I always admired the name that it had sort of a light touch to it, you know. So whereas, you know, similarly muscle cars from the, you know, slightly different market, but they have those big rugged, you know, kind of manly names, for lack of a better adjective. There was something else that didn't, you know. So I think once again to Ford, you know, a nice props to that. So.
And of course, the Capri, which was based on the mass market Cortina, was sold essentially as the European version of the Mustang, because the Mustang wasn't really sold in Europe. And the tagline in the advertising was the car you always promised yourself. And it was massively successful, and definitely with the name of Capri certainly evoked the kind of go-go 60s and you know, expression and all of that stuff, and a fantastic car. I have the flip side of the challenge of selling a car specifically to women. Let's note at the outset that this is a ridiculous idea, given that the vast majority of car buying decisions made in households across America are made by women. So there are ways to do that, obviously, without being overt. This was overt, and it was in the mid 1950s when the marketing minds at the Chrysler Corporation decided that the way that they're going to sell their new Dodge car to women was to name it the La Femme. This was only available in like pink or white or something. It was in
a lot of pastels,
super fruity colors, even for the mid 1950s. I'm not entirely sure they sold all that many of them, but they are prized now as being collector's items. I suspect because they are rare and sort of an example of a time that, you know, the car companies did not get it right when it came to selling a car to a particular audience.
Right.
I also felt like it's I always thought of these guys in black ties and short sleeve white shirts sitting around a room. At that time it would have been Highland Park, right? And you know, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? I got it. Stan's got the great idea. Let's go with that. Yeah. Anyway.
And it says a lot about how many women were working in the marketing and ad agencies in Detroit in the 50s that got greenlit at all.
I can see the steno pool going, did you see this? Did you see this?
Martha, I can't believe they're going to sell this.
Right.
But they didn't ask us. Sure, go ahead. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so here's a car that I had kind of forgotten about of late that I thought I thought it was always a good looking car, and B, I thought it was a great name. I don't think you'd get away with doing this name today, but okay. The Chevy Beretta. You know, that two-door, nice proportions. That back glass is kind of amazing to look at. It curves in like 14 different ways.
Mhm.
The front end has a nice presence to it. You know, that to show how easily that can be screwed up, just look at the Corsica on the other side of the showroom, which really just never played well to me. But that Beretta, and it was again one of the things that I constantly say: if you make each level of that car of a car look good, they'll all look good. You know, they'll sell. They'll all be an advertisement for that car. So it wasn't until my friend Dawn, you know, pointed it out to me in some article just today, as a matter of fact. I thought, you know, that's always was a good looking car. So
And
you know.
and I every now and then I'll see one, or there's a particular one that kind of lives, I think, in my neighborhood. It's aged extremely well.
Yes.
It is a shame that GM dropped that line after a single generation and one refresh, because it was a really nice looking car. It
Mhm.
certainly looked far better than A, the Cavalier upon which it was based, and
Mhm.
B, the related but not really related end body cars over at the other divisions, the
Which
Calais,
all looked
the
awful.
Somerset slash Skylark, and the Grand
Yeah.
Am looked the best of those three,
Right.
but
Right.
they were all kind of had the same kind of, you know, BOP notchback thing. Whereas, you know, yeah, that Beretta was that was a great car. I'd have one now, honestly. Like
Yeah.
it's, you know, except for the rental car spec interior, like that car is great.
But yeah.
And you know, by the time they had gotten to a point where they were building them in decent numbers, like they'd worked out the issues with the engine and stuff. And you know, the
Yeah.
saying is a GM car will run badly longer than most other cars will run at all. So I mean, it probably would run forever.
Yeah. On a slightly related note, and I think car platform wise, and I could be totally wrong on this. It always felt like those end cars were kind of the basis for the downsized Eldorado Tornado of
Well, they
the
were probably being developed at the same time by the same
okay.
people. So, I mean, you had a lot of groupthink going on at the tech center at the time, I think.
What I remember, and I was working for the car rental company at the time, so we would get invited to new product rollouts and stuff. And you know, when they used to have, you know, the breakfast at the local Holiday Inn, and you know, the guy would be up there, a whole bunch of slides, and you know, and I'm sitting at the table with the guy who owned the Cadillac dealership, the big Cadillac dealership in Hartford, and they show the Eldorado, the downsized Eldorado. And like, okay, so everyone is like, what the hell? And he turns to the guy next to him and says, how the hell are we supposed to sell that? And I'm like, dude, I agree with you.
They had done GM, and this was one of Bill Mitchell's final acts in Warren. They had done a masterful job of making the previous Eldorado smaller, but not look smaller. They had taken a lot of the excess fat out. That 79 to 85 Eldorado, classic, gorgeous. All of the cars on that platform are really, really, really good. Um, and yeah, boy, whew, 86 was tough. And they acknowledged it eventually a few years later when they added like another foot to it. Yeah.
Exactly. which which I always thought all those that Seville of that era, like I like those. You know,
Mhm.
that was you know, that late 80s period of GM design, you know, really I think got a lot of these cars right.
True.
So where are we going, Glenn?
Glenn is next.
I got one. Um, y'all remember by any chance for just a couple years in the late 80s, early 90s, Daihatsu was importing cars into the US? Yes. They made the wonderful choice to call their first big foray into the US market the Charade. Are you going to buy a car from a new company, and car that, not that they were a new company, but new to the US, and it's a Charade? In all honesty, I think it was a just catastrophically bad name choice for a company's first, entry into the U.S. market. And of course, they didn't. They lasted all of what, about 4 years, maybe.
Yeah.
It also
wasn't
wasn't a
that
great car. It was not a great car. So.
They did sort of redeem themselves name-wise by naming their SUV the Rocky.
I was just going to say that.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember the Rocky.
Yeah.
That's a good name. That was
I
a
always
good
felt
name.
like it begged that there should be a Bullwinkle out there too, right?
Watch me pull a car name out of my hat. Again, that
Hey,
trick never
Rocky!
works.
Similarly,
To our audience, Rocky and Bullwinkle was a cartoon that was popular in the 60s.
when we were kids, yes. At least when I was a kid, right? Similarly, Daewoo also imported cars, and I don't remember much about Daewoo, but I remember just cracking up over a car named the Laganza, because it was just like, it was just, every time I saw it, I was like, it wasn't just a Laganza, it was a Laganza. It was like,
you need an exclamation point.
Yeah. You don't just drive a Laganza, you drive a Laganza. It just,
like,
I don't know why it cracked me up, but it did. And it didn't, the name and the car and the image and everything just didn't fit,
Or would you rather like a Lanos?
A Lanos, there you go.
A Nubira, perhaps. Weird names.
Right.
The Laganza actually was was designed by Giugiaro at Ital Design.
Really?
It was supposed to be the new Jaguar of that time, and Jag looked at it and said, "Nope." And Daewoo said, "Sure, why not?"
Sure.
And they built it. Daewoo still exists today. It's known as GM Korea, the producer of the Chevy Trax and the Buick Envista.
No, oh God, I own one, and I didn't even know this. Wait, I own a Daewoo, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
If your car was built by GM Korea, you own a Daewoo.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Encore GX. It's definitely from, well, they certainly have cleaned up their act. I honestly, I like barely remember the Lanos and the Nubira, which I was pronouncing Nubria for the longest time. And then I realized, wait a minute, because I thought a Nubria was like some cute little rodent, isn't that it? No.
Oh, you're very close. Yeah. It's a Nutria is what you're thinking of.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was. I actually said, I was like, wait a minute. It's Nubira? Okay, well, what? There goes the cute rodent reference. But yeah, I always just, Laganza always correct me. It still does, obviously. So I love a good car name that corrects.
Of course. I have not, it's sort of it's a bad name, but it's a good story. And it again goes back a ways, and it involves a company that we've already talked about, the Ford Motor Company. Once upon a time, Ford was trying to come up with a name for a model or for a line of car. And they'd come up with some of the sub names, but they needed the name. And so one of the things they did was they hired a poet, and I can't remember who. And she workshopped some names. Among them, Utopian Turtle Top. And Mongoose Civique, Civique. You're like, who wouldn't want to drive home in your brand new Mongoose Civique, right? The Ford Motor Company rejected those names and several other flights of fancy and decided instead that they would name their mid-luxury car the Edsel.
Edsel, yes.
Now, the model names were actually really good. Ranger, Pacer, Corsair, and Citation were terrific names for cars. Some of them are still around now.
Still around today.
Two of them, and two of them are on Ford Motor Company products. Right. But yeah, and at the time, Edsel the First didn't want his name on the car and had to be kind of talked into it. And then, of course, it isn't so much that it was a bad car, it was just incredibly poorly timed because it came out in the middle of, or at the beginning of, a nationwide recession.
Mhm.
And a recession that ended up killing off DeSoto by the end of 1961.
Mm.
So, the fact that it looked the way it did didn't help, and the fact that it wasn't built well didn't help. But yeah, unfortunately, Edsel became synonymous with failure
Yeah.
in a lot of industries and in the American vernacular, which is too bad because Ed the First deserved a lot better. The guy who
Absolutely.
the guy who created Continental deserves way better than that.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
always there. And going back to the poet, I I think of that same group of guys in white short sleeve shirts with black ties going, we build cars here. 4 wheels, steering wheel, doors. It's a car, right? Anyway.
One of the other names they rejected, by the way, was the name Altair, which is a star of the first magnitude, and it literally means flyer, which would have been an outstanding name for a car. I'm sad they haven't put it on one yet. It's got to be better than whatever GX something or other they're making at Infiniti these days. But we fixed that. We fixed that brand a few podcasts ago.
All right. All right, gentlemen. This has been fun.
It has been.
We're gonna land this plane for this episode. Remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. It helps the little algorithm. And we will see you again.